Hey listeners, welcome to another episode of Brown Girls Read Podcast. This is your host Daman Tiwana.
And this is Khyati Thakur. And both of us love reading books.
On this podcast, we bring our favorite books to you and discuss the parts that were most meaningful to us and how we found them interesting or relatable as brown girls. Today, we have invited Arlan Hamilton, the author of It's About Damn Time, on our podcast to discuss more about this amazing book, her life experiences as a woman of color in a male-dominated society, and her journey to success.
If you haven't listened to our discussion of the book, go check out the previous episode now. And let's hear a quick word from our sponsor before we bring Arlan on.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's free.
There is creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more.
You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast.
Providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space, so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo.
I recently joined as a member and you can too.
Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience.
That's podgo.co at podgo.co.
Hey Arlan, thank you so much for coming to Brown Girls Read Podcast. We are so happy to have you here and we loved your book so much. So it's just a delight for us to, have you here to learn more about your life, your experiences.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I just want to ask you to start by just introducing yourselves to our listeners, because I'm sure they would love to know more about your life, how you built your business, and, anything you want to share.
Yeah, so I started a venture fund called Backstage Capital officially in 2015. But as the book goes into detail I actually started really thinking about it 2011-ish and started trying to raise for it around then as well. Spent about 3.5 years trying to raise money for a fund that would invest in underrepresented and now underestimated, as we call them, founders. And in my view, for what our purposes, that was women, that was people of color, and that was LGBTQ founders, because I identified it as all three. I didn't have any background or anything in finance or in tech even. I was living in Texas where I grew up, born in Mississippi and grew up in Texas with my mom and my brother. And I was living back there after having lived in other cities throughout my life, throughout my 20s. But I was back at kind of zero, at scratch. Didn't have much money to speak of at all. Was sharing a place with my mom. And then we got kicked out of that place because we couldn't pay the rent. And then we ended up living in hotels and on people's couches and things like that. But this whole time from like 31 to 34, I just really thought there should be this fund that invested in underrepresented founders. And it wasn't that I thought that one fund would just change the world and make all the difference. But I thought it's not happening this way exactly. So if I can make it happen, even on a small scale, it can act as and serve as a case study. And then you can take that case study and just replicate it. I was very intentional and intent on doing this, even through all of the personal ups and downs and hardships. And through a series of events that I'm excited about talking about in the book, I made my way to September 2015 and got my first investor, and then have just gone off to the races since then.
That sounds really great, actually, and it sounds really brave of you. And that also reflects in your book, actually. That's why I think we related to the book so much.
Being women of color ourselves, and also we live in the Silicon Valley, so we do see a bit of this discrimination. So it was just so great to read your story and to see how you are doing this great work to uplift others from these marginalized communities.
Yeah, thank you. It sucks that it's the case. And a lot of times we have to just walk into a room and somebody has an exact imagination of what we are.
Yes.
And it's usually very one-sided and very one-dimensional. And that to me is like daily heartbreak. I remember, with the book, we're talking about the book, I went to a store for the first time in months because of COVID. I went to a bookstore And I hadn't gone to a bookstore for the several months that my book has been out since May and seen my book in person. I hadn't been to that. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to do it now because I feel like I have some safety measures in place and I'm going to go to certain places I did my research on. So I do all of that. I kind of even leave the quarantine. I go to 2 places. The first place doesn't have it. So I go to the second place. The second place has it, but it's been sold out, which is really cool. So I'm like excited about that. But the first place, when I went to it, I went there with like a Sharpie because I wanted to sign the book. Like I'd seen so many authors do, sign the book and you can go find it. And I was followed around the store.
Oh,
A
wow.
bookstore.
Oh my
Like
Oh my
God.
like
God.
they thought yeah, they follow me around. It's a nice neighborhood, whatever. I don't even know what that means anymore, but it was an affluent, expensive neighborhood. I also live in an affluent, expensive neighborhood down the street. So, but it was in a expensive neighborhood. I was wearing a hoodie, but didn't have my hoodie on, my hood up. I was walking around and I was the only black person in the store. Everybody else was white. And I was looking for my book, quietly, silently, looking for the book that I just toiled and had a 6-figure deal to do and all of that, right? And all of the things that I work on with Backstage, it didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was there was a black woman who's kind of tall and kind of big and has a hoodie on maybe, who's not wearing, $2,000 worth of clothing. And why is she here? And we just got to make sure. She probably won't do anything, but we just got to make sure she doesn't steal $20 worth of stuff from us and put it in her hoodie. I'm so used to it, but I still felt it was like a heartbreak. It was like a daily heartbreak. And so I left and I went to the second store, which I was much more welcomed in. And they had been doing a better job with my book anyway. So I was
That's
happy.
horrible, though. I'm so sorry that keeps
It's
happening.
Yeah, it's okay, but it's, sometimes it happens to an extreme. Sometimes it happens every blue moon and you just forget about it, depending on all sorts of variables. But it's always tough to take because you're talking about someone personally, even if you don't take it personally.
Are instances like these that inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, they inspired me to write the book, to tell my story, to tell people who are, as your podcast is called, brown girl tree. That's so cool. So it's to say, not only just to tell my story, which is, very one specific person, but it's to say that so many people are seen and so many people are respected and so many people, there's somebody at least like in your corner saying that you can do this. And I am living proof of that. And I don't think it ends at anybody. I think it continues. It just grows and grows and grows. And there's so much potential and possibility out there. And that doesn't matter what age you are either. It doesn't matter if you've been around the sun a few times. There's so much out there for people. So I always, and including in the book, talk about repurposing things. So you repurpose these sad and frustrating occasions and you turned it into fuel. And then it's like, bring it on.
That's awesome. You're an inspiration.
Yeah, I think for all the minorities everywhere, right? It was so inspiring to read all the accounts that you have in your book. And then I want to get a little bit deeper into the book. The one thing that I took away from it was when you talked about writing your own headline. That just inspired me so much. So I started thinking about what would my headline be? Can you talk a little on that? Like, what was your process? Do you think like one should extremely just go all out when they're writing their headline or just be a little bit realistic?
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea of it is it's a lot like people have, vision boards or they have different ways that they can, you have to have this sort of, in my opinion, this North Star that you're looking towards to say, where am I going? What am I doing all of this work for? Whatever it is. Why am I waking up and going to a 9-to-5 job? Why am I working at this place or that place? And why am I building this thing if I am building a company? So the headlines started pretty early in the fund process. It started like 2014 or so, about a year before I got my first investor. And it was just drafts in my email. And I would say things to myself, like, I would write it as the headline and put dates on it and things like that. And that was the process and has remained the process. The one main headline I had was Arlan Hamilton's Backstage Capital invests in 100 companies by underrepresented founders. And I wrote that in 2014 and I put a date of 2020 on it because I said by 2020, that's a cool date. By then that's what I'm going to do. And it was just really close. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And then we reached that in 2018. And I looked at that almost every day up until 28. I looked at it over and over and over again because especially when there was tough times, which there are many, even after getting investment, there are plenty more tough times to come. And then I had a few others that some have come true, some have not, some have exceeded my wildest expectation. It was great to have it as a goalpost marker, mile marker. When it comes to what you write and kind of how you do it, I don't think there's any fast and hard rules necessarily that I have about it. I have found that because it is your personal headline, it's for you. I have found that really letting go and dreaming, I think that has really been helpful. When I said I was going to invest in 100 companies, I was poor. It had to be a dream. It had to be a hope and a wish and all of these things. But you have to execute on it to make it happen. So I would say if I had written, or if I do write today, I'm going to have purple hands and fly. That's probably not going to happen, but maybe it happens in its own special way. You know, maybe I find a jetpack and some gloves. But the point is, I'm not going to go so far crazy with it that it's just something that even if I attained it, what would the point be? But I'm also not going to say, give myself 5 years to maybe get a promotion. Because to me, that might, from my personality, that might be too long. That might be giving me an excuse to just be not engaged enough. You want to make the headline something that you instantly start working towards. That's how you measure it. Like, can I instantly, as I write it, the next step is, what do I do to start it? You know, you don't get there immediately, but you start with a draft. Like, what if your idea is your name publishes the book titled XYZ by 2023?
Oh, that's Daman's headline.
Yeah.
He wants to write a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going in my head when you were talking, Arlan, that, you know, I should create a headline with a date for my book, because otherwise I will never get to writing it.
Yes. And there's so many pieces to it. And if you have that deadline in your head and you start researching and maybe you already have, and you know how publishing works, and you decide how you want to do it, if you want to do it self-published or find a publisher or India, this or that, then you just have these 2 or 3 lanes that you can be writing in parallel to each other and going towards your goal. Yeah. And maybe it'll happen in 2022 and maybe it'll happen in 2024, but it won't happen at all if you don't start.
I needed to hear that, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you still write headlines now?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I have headlines going right now.
Oh, wow.
So I'm hearing you talk about the headline, and I can't help but notice that there's so much hustle in your personality. Like, there's no other way that you would have achieved what you have in the short period of time, and considering all the hurdles that were in your way without that kind of hustle. Hustle over the time has also become that Instagram buzzword where everyone's just throwing it around. So I just wanted to have you talk a little bit about how do we identify when a hustle becomes toxic or self-sabotaging, and how can we make sure that our hustle is actually effective and productive and it's not just hustle for the sake of hustle.
Couple of things. I mean, there's a couple questions and a couple of things come to mind. The second question you asked about how do we tell when it's real and when it's busy work is how much of it you're posting about and not actually doing, whether it's posting on social or telling people or whatever. Most of my hustle happens behind all of the social. I know that I'm out there a lot, but that tells you something. Majority of what I do that is like the true stuff is not even being applauded publicly. That's where the substance comes from. Really, when you talk about, like, I can pop out and say, oh, I got $6 million from Mark Cuban to make investments. And you can see that as a headline and people are applauding that. But what that took was 2 years, a year and a half of real hustle behind the scenes. We did one kind of round last year for an indie website. We didn't even take it to Fast Company or Forbes, which we could have. We did it for an indie site that we both had invested in. And we said, okay, we're going to talk about a little bit about this. And then we waited another year to talk about it more. But in the meantime, I was investing. In the meantime, backstage team, we were all hustling. So that need or desire you have to immediately explain it to other people can be a good marker of, is it real work or is it something that is just so you can play catch up or something? The way I think about hustle and hustle culture and all of that is a little bit like, when I compare it to self-love and put it in the same vein, it's a little bit like how I think about love itself. Depending on, your situations, your different ages, whoever's listening, like depending on who you are, you may have been in a toxic relationship before, and you may have been in a great relationship before. And maybe because you've been in both, you know what one feels like and one doesn't. And love isn't supposed to hurt. Love isn't supposed to be really difficult. It can be challenging and you can make sacrifices, but the bad isn't supposed to outweigh the good. So that's how I feel about hustle. If you're tired all the time, and if you're stressed all the time, and if you're sacrificing events or time with your family and your friends and all these things, you're in a toxic relationship with your hustle. And kind of like this red light that should be pinging, check engine, pull over, because it's not supposed to hurt. It's not supposed to be exhaustive in the fact that it's like depleting. It's supposed to fill you up and give to you. That's how I started measuring it.
That's awesome. I don't think I've heard this perspective ever before. If you're going to Instagram for motivation, hustle can actually just be portrayed as something so different from what you just said.
Yes. Also, keep in mind that most of the people who are touting hustle, including yelling at you for not hustling enough and not being real enough or wanting it enough, blah, blah, blah. Most of those people have like a full team behind them. Most of them have some cushion. I'm not saying they're rich, but they have some cushion, whether they earned it themselves or not. I'm not taking away from what they've done, but the people who have the platforms to say these things to people aren't living the same lives as those people. So how can they say you need to hustle as much as I do when they don't have your 5-person glam team or your 3-person strategy team? Or in some cases, it's one parent taking on the brunt of the home stuff. If there are kids involved and there's a home and there's parents involved. And the other one who is out there on the stages screaming about hustle doesn't have to worry about soccer practice or getting every meal made.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
I always try to look at the source of who's telling me what I should be doing.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.
Yeah. So talking of advices, what is that one advice that you would like to give to people of color and minorities who just want to, start working on their own idea and they don't have a lot of contacts or they have very limited contacts?
Well, I didn't have a lot of contacts in this space when I started backstage. I had contacts elsewhere. So I'll do it twofold. One piece of advice is to, no matter where you are in life and what you want to do now and what you may want to do later, is to start cultivating your network today. And that doesn't mean it has to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be anything where the people you're networking with are super successful, because some of those people will grow with you. You just don't want anybody in your circle who's going to bring you down.
Yeah.
But start networking now, building your network now, which is like really thinking about what you have. I'm big on like this diagnostic idea of like so many people are reaching for something or going towards something, but they don't even look around what they already have. Who is in your network today, and what can you do to cultivate that today? Can you, for instance, host a monthly Zoom? I know people who do that really well. They're not trying to get anything specific. They're not trying to like raise for something or do something. They're just like, while we're here, how about every quarter or every month on Tuesdays at 4, we get together for 30 minutes and just talk about our lives and build that over time, or you do it another way. And you build it over time. 3 years from now, when you are looking for that very specific thing, somebody in that group knows somebody in their group who can make that happen for you. And you put these pieces together. So if you're not doing that today because you're waiting for something to be so perfect later down the road, and then I'm going to go ask, it's going to be too late for you. I was on a blow-up bed in Pearland, Texas. I had the internet, which I was so grateful for. I had a smartphone, had a laptop. I had no car. There was no way to get to anybody. There was no way to go fly. I couldn't afford a flight to San Francisco. This was just 6 years ago that I was 34 years old in this situation. But I still said, well, okay, I can email people. I can research people. I can relate to people. I can ask the people I already know if they know people. I can do some cold calling. I can do some curated conversation with people. There's so much you can do right now that if you're not doing it, or if you're waiting for it to happen for you, or if you think that you're not in the right place, like, I don't have anything going for me, so why should I reach out to somebody? this is where you are today. It's not where you're going to be, hopefully, right? Like this is how you make things happen. This is how I made things happen. Starting from scratch. That's why I feel like the book is so relatable to people. And you can talk to me about that too, because I think it's like, I'm not telling you what to do once you've already gotten rich and how you do it.
Right.
I'm telling you, like, I was dirt poor. But what I lacked in finances and connections, I made up for in ingenuity, and I used the time that I had. Anytime that I wasn't working to just make ends meet, I was strategizing. Every single day you can meet one new person. Do you know how many people that is over a few years? Your network is incredible after that. Every single week you can meet a new person. You have 50 new people. And if you strategize about it and you research the people and you know why you want them in your network and you know what you can also, people always say, you know, in negotiating, always offer value first, 100%. But it's not transactional. It's not, I'm going to help this person today a little bit, so they'll help me a lot in 2 years. Don't do that. There's just so much alchemy and art, and so much can happen over time if you just sort of live your life with great intention, have a focused goal, be good to people, be good to yourself, as we talked about. All those things kind of create a perfect storm for a really great life.
Yeah, that's actually really good advice. Thanks so much. And we love the instance that you mentioned in the book where you created a goal to meet some number of people every
10,000.
day. 10,000.
Well, 10,000 people total was the goal.
Yeah, right. That was mind-blowing.
I also love the reality check that came later that, oh, I didn't account for how much time it would take to actually, you know, interact with people.
To actually be with those people. Because I thought it was going to be like, oh, take a picture. Oh, hey, take a picture and get a group. And I would just upload the pictures at night and it would be on. But I was doing it. And people were like, tell us why you're doing that. Oh, okay. Now, you know, people want to talk about themselves. This is what I do. And then it becomes so interesting. And so, because at first I was like, man, I got to go. But then it was like, wait, what, you do what? Oh, that's so crazy. That's so interesting. So what we're talking about is this quest I had to meet 10,000 people. And I had other reasons for starting it. And then it turned into something really beautiful. And so that's in the book too. And it's just like I still have such high regard and wonderful feelings when I think about that. And it's kind of like what we just talked about, but manifested, like in person, you know?
That was one of the most interesting parts of the book because it has so much reality to it. Other than that, I think I really enjoyed reading about your self-care section because to me, it was like so real and relatable. Do you have a self-care routine that you follow for yourself that you can share with us and our listeners?
I just practice what I preach a lot. I try, and I stop work every single day at 6 to watch Rachel Maddow. I try to keep my weekends as free as possible. Sometimes, you know, not as free, but I have very, very, very good boundaries. And they didn't happen overnight. So there's no routine other than, you know, watching what I want to watch and giving myself that freedom to say no to people. I also love a good sweatpant. And before COVID, you know, I would say get sweatpants and everybody would laugh. And now everybody's in sweatpants all day long. So, but that's pampering, you know, you got to take care of yourself even more today.
Right. What are you reading nowadays and any recommendations for us?
Well, I have so many books I need to read but I'm reading Caste, Caste. That was in Oprah's book club, and it's a really incredible book. It ties a lot of things together. It's about race. And I am reading Perfect Peace by Daniel Black. And it's actually a book that Journey Smollett handed me in Atlanta a few months ago when I ran into her. The author was with her. Journey Smollett had just that day wrapped filming of Lovecraft Country. And now Lovecraft Country is the show that I've been binging all summer. And so it's just a really wonderful kind of circle. I ran into her. She was talking to the author. They were great in conversation. He happened to have a copy of the book. She gifted me the book. And I'm finally having a chance to really dig into it. It's about early 1900s, a Black family where I don't know why yet because I haven't gotten there. But for some reason, the mother of these children has her son live as a girl from a very early age. Very interesting. And it was something that they both said that I had to read. So I'm very excited to read it.
Sound interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan, so much for giving us your time. It's been so great to talk to you, and we have really enjoyed listening to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate your time as well.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this intimate conversation with Arlan. We are so happy and so grateful to her for coming on our podcast and being so candid with us. We have learned so much from her, and we hope you did too. For our next episode, we are reading a novel by Megha Majumdar called A Burning. We hope you will be reading with us, and until then,
Keep listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Brown Girls Read podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave us a 5-star rating and a comment. You can support us at anchor.fm/browngirlsread/support. Your support will allow us to continue this podcast and bring more episodes to you. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Instagram, Brown Girls Read Pod, and Brown Girls Read 1 on Twitter. If you have book recommendations for us, you can leave us a comment or message on our social media, and you can also subscribe to us on YouTube for more content.